Do you have oil dripping from your transmission bell housing on your Mark 8 and you can't figure out where it's coming from? Well, my name is Cole from FCP Euro, and today I'm going to show you how to replace the vacuum pump and all the seals on your Mark 8 Golf. All right, so I have the Pierberg vacuum pump kit here right in front of me on the table. This includes everything that you're going to need, including all of the hardware and gaskets to install this vacuum pump in your Mark 8. Now, why are we replacing the vacuum pump? Well, there's a couple symptoms that are going to indicate that you may have a failed or failing vacuum pump. One of the biggest things with the vacuum pump is going to be oil leaks. Now, the oil is going to be leaking either from the gasket that mates to the block, the high pressure fuel pump area, or the back of the pump itself. Now, this kit includes all of those seals that could be that common leaking problem. However, not only do we have leaks in the oil system, we could have leaks in the air intake system as well, which can cause the vehicle to run a bit rough or stall altogether. Now, besides providing a vacuum source for the intake manifold, this vacuum pump holds the high pressure fuel pump because all of it is driven off of the camshaft. Now, the Mark 8 is a little bit different than the Mark 7, where instead of using a vacuum brake booster, this vehicle has an electronic brake booster. So the sole purpose of this vacuum pump is to create a vacuum source for the intake manifold. Now, as far as service intervals go, there isn't really a defined interval from Volkswagen. However, around 100,000 miles is when we're going to start to see some of those oil leaks and maybe some vacuum leaks from the vacuum pump. Not only do we offer the Pierberg kit here, we also offer a genuine Volkswagen kit assembled at fcpeuro.com, where there's a bunch of options for your Mark 8. Now that we've gone over the kit that we're going to be installing, let's go over the tools that you'll need. We're going to need an arrangement of different length and size sockets, including a 17mm wheel socket, stubby 24mm, 10mm, T30, 7mm, and an M10 triple square along with a 19mm. We'll need different lengths of extensions, ratchets ranging from 1/4 inch all the way to 1/2 inch, and different lengths of sizes. We'll need a stubby 19mm open-end wrench along with a standard length 19mm open-end wrench. We'll need a short and long hose pick, 90-degree small pick, flathead screwdriver, optional trim panel popper, hose clamp pliers, needle nose pliers, an array of torque wrenches that will range from 8 Newton meters up to 140 Newton meters, a Sharpie, power tools to make the job easier, and optionally, to tighten down the fuel rails, you'll need Volkswagen tool T40434 or a Lyle 19mm fuel line socket that you'll have to grind down to fit. Now that we've gone over all the tools that we're going to need, let's pop the hood and get into this DIY. All right, so we have our vehicle safely jacked up in the air and we have the hood open, so now we can start removing some components to gain access to the vacuum pump that we'll be replacing today. The first thing that we're going to work on is our intake here. I have a 7mm socket on a ratchet to get to this worm clamp, and then some hose clamp pliers to slide this backwards, and just leave that on the tube because we'll reinstall that later. We'll take a 90-degree pick here, go right underneath this hose, pop that off, slide this coupler off the air intake, and now we can just pull this intake up off the grommets. May take a little bit of force. Be careful with it, and then slide that out and set it to the side. Now we'll come back here and pull this up, rotate it past the junction, and then unclip this bottom piece and slide it out. This can be a little bit difficult. It's good to use some glass cleaner to try to get that free. Once we have that intake pipe off, we can take some blue shop towels, shove them into the turbo inlet. Remember that you put those there because we will have to remove those once we reinstall all of the intake. With this intake pipe removed, we have the pipe for the diverter valve. We can just tie this off to the side using a bungee strap, or I have a third hand here that I love to use and just find a hole to hook it into and just give it a little bit of tension to keep it out of the way. Now with a little bit more access, we can take a 7mm socket on a 1/4" ratchet, get in here and start removing this clamp on the turbo outlet charge pipe, because we're going to be removing this whole charge pipe here. We just want to make sure that's loose enough for us to be able to get that off. Now with that clamp loose, we'll take a T30 socket and remove this screw here on the charge pipe, and then move this wiring harness over it. Next, we're going to take a little trim tool. This is used for upholstery panels. I like it because it's a little metal. You don't need this, but it definitely makes it easier to remove some clips. And there is a wiring harness that we're going to have to unclip down here. Just get underneath of it and use it to pry it out. You don't need this, but it definitely makes it a lot easier. Now that we've disconnected everything from the top side, we're gonna head underneath the car, remove the belly pan, and continue the process on removing this charge pipe. There's 8 T25 torque screws that hold this all in. We have a little electric screwdriver here with our T25 bit to remove all these. Now with all these screws removed, we can take a little flathead screwdriver, pry up in between these two panels to release the lock, remove it, and set it aside. All right, now with this removed, we can take our 7mm socket and remove these two hose clamps to remove this hose. These hoses can be a little difficult to remove, so a nice hose pick will be helpful to get underneath that hose, go all the way around it to break that seal free, and we'll repeat that on the other side. Again, you'll see this is a little bit challenging to get in there, and we want to make sure that we don't damage the hose with our pick. So we have to be very gentle. There we go. And just work it around. So with turbocharged vehicles, oil likes to pool in this area on the turbo hose. So it's good to have a drain bucket when you're pulling this hose off, just in case any oil likes to spill out. So once those are loose and broken free, we can now remove this pipe, and no oil, which is good. Now that we have that off, we can take some blue shop towels and just shove them into these holes to make sure that nothing is going to enter those holes while we're moving it. Remember, we're going to have to remove these before we reinstall everything. There's a little wiring harness holder right here that we can take that same hose pick, and there's a hole in the back. We're going to press down on that, and then this will be able to slide off. And we can set it to the side here. So to take this T30 bolt out of the bracket, we're going to want to move this coolant hose out to the side. So we'll take a pick right here and get underneath of it to release that clamp and push that out. And then once we have that out, we can pull this coolant hose over to the side. Now with this coolant hose out of this bracket, we can just slide this off to give us that extra room. Now with this off, we can find this T30 holding this bracket and remove it. Now we're going to go back up top and remove the charge pipe all the way out. Now with my GBH, we're going to want to get right underneath of that hose and work our way around it. Now another thing that we can do is spray a little bit of lubricant while we're using our GBH, and that's just gets a little bit of that underneath there to help it slide off a little bit better. Now you can see it's starting to work off. Now with that seal broken free, we can pull this hose towards us, wiggling it a little bit. There we go. Now lastly, before we can remove this charge pipe, since we now have this out of the way a little bit, we can grab a 7mm socket and place it on this other clamp for this rubber section of the hose, loosen it, use a pick to get underneath of it, and then remove this piece. Since I have it cracked up a little bit, grab a little bit of spray. There we go. All right. Now we can pull this rubber hose section so we don't have to fight taking this charge pipe out. Now with that rubber pipe off, we can start working this charge pipe up and out of the engine bay. Now with this charge pipe removed, we can take our blue shop towels and stuff them in that turbo outlet. Now the next steps to get this vacuum pump off to replace it is going to having to remove the high pressure fuel pump, and we're gonna have to get to the fuel lines that are underneath the intake manifold. So we're gonna take a T30 socket and remove this one bolt here, and that bolt is holding this coolant line, and we're just gonna give it a little bit more pliability and leeway. If this car has some age, that line is gonna be pretty brittle, so just be careful there. There's also a clip right here for this wiring harness, and then there is a solid clip on the pump itself. Now that that's loose, I have a little bit more freedom here to move that. Now, when working on the high pressure fuel system, we have to note that the fuel pressure is extremely high on this system, and we have to be very cautious. I always like wearing a set of safety glasses when working in a high pressure fuel system, and we're gonna have to have some blue paper towels here to wrap around the lines to make sure we don't have fuel spilling everywhere. So at this part of the job, Volkswagen requires you to have a specialty tool numbered T40434, and that's basically a thin wall fuel line socket with a 19mm hex head. That tool is a little bit hard to source, so as an alternative, you can use the Lyle 19mm fuel line socket that we offer on our website and modify it to fit. We're gonna have to shave down the outside of this socket to make it a thin wall socket to fit in these really tight spots underneath the intake manifold where that fuel line is. So now we're gonna head over to our bench grinder and show you how to grind this socket down and what thickness it needs to be. All right, as you can see, I look a little bit different. I have my face shield here, and we're gonna be grinding this socket down. So we're just gonna wanna grind this part of the socket to create a thinner wall so we can get access underneath the intake manifold. All right, we have our tool here now that we've ground down to the thickness that we need to get underneath the intake manifold and loosen that fuel nut. You'll see right here, it's just about to the edge of where the hex nut is, and it's gonna be really tight. So this might take a couple tries of grinding, test fitting, grinding, test fitting to make sure this will fit and rotate, or you can use the factory tool that is made for that position. Another option is going to be to use some open-end wrenches. However, we can't set the torque spec with those, so we'd rather show you the correct way using a socket so we can put our torque wrench on there and torque it to the specified value. So we're gonna start by sliding our socket upwards here, get it right on that nut. We have an extension on our socket to make it a little easier to place our ratchet on here. Once we have the socket and the ratchet on this, we're gonna wanna take some towels and wrap it around this fuel fitting and just crack this loose. Very slowly, we don't wanna be abrupt because it is a very high pressure. So we have this union cracked free now, so we can take a 19mm open-end stubby wrench to rotate this union nut free. Now, from the factory, these high pressure fuel lines are coated with almost is like a Loctite. So it might not spin off really quick like how we want to. It might require a little bit of force. Fully loose and to the side. Now we're gonna crack the other fitting underneath the intake manifold and repeat the process. We can now fully remove this high pressure fuel line. Now that we have the high pressure line removed, we're gonna work on removing this low pressure line that's made out of a plastic rubber composite. We'll take our needle nose pliers here, crimp right at the end, push in and pull out. We'll put a little rag underneath here just to capture any fuel that dribbles out of that. we'll have to remove this little electrical connector, which I'm going to take a pick, go right underneath that red locking tab, press down here, and remove it and send it to the side. Now, to continue to remove this vacuum pump from the vehicle, we're going to have to rotate the crankshaft so we don't damage the pump, because this pump runs off of the camshaft. So we're going to go over to the passenger side wheel well, remove that wheel, remove the washer tank, and then we can rotate the crankshaft. Slide it off that wheel hanger and put it to the side. We're going to take a T25 screwdriver and remove all the screws retaining the fender line. Now with that loose, we can slide this out and away. We're going to want to drain this tank before we start removing it. We're going to take a 90-degree pick, get underneath this fitting, pop this clip upwards. Be very careful. It is plastic and we need to reuse this. Set it to the side and then pull this fitting off of the washer fluid tank. It helps if you have a drain bucket underneath of it, make sure that it is aimed directly where it's going to be flowing out of. And if you want to be reusing your window washer fluid, be sure that bucket is clean, clean, clean. We'll take a 90-degree pick and remove the other side of this line off of the pump and slide it off. And there's an electrical connector tucked up here for the pump itself that we'll have to remove. Again, a 90-degree pick getting underneath that tab will make it much easier to free that connector off the pump. Take our thumb to release this connector and pull directly up and set this harness to the side. Now that all of our fluid is drained, we can take a 10mm socket and remove this top bolt here and then slide this whole upper half of the assembly out of a socket. Now with the upper half of the washer fluid reservoir removed, we can go back underneath and drop the whole assembly. Now we'll take a 10mm socket and remove these 3 bolts and then lower the washer tank. Now with that last bolt removed, this will just slide right out. There'll still be some fluid in there. Now with the window washer fluid reservoir removed, we can clearly see the crankshaft. You'll see right over here we have a silver line highlighted with a Sharpie, and behind that on the back of that crankshaft is going to be a little notch that we've also highlighted with the Sharpie. Now, highlighting this with the Sharpie and drawing this line makes this job a lot easier. So if you do have a Sharpie laying around or a paint pen, you can do as so. Once we've marked this, we want to rotate the crankshaft with a 24mm socket and a ratchet clockwise to line up with this little tab on the engine block, just like so. I've already rotated our crankshaft, so these 2 lines meet up, but I'm going to show you how to do that again real quick. We'll take our 24mm socket on our ratchet, and we're going to want to go clockwise very slowly. You're going to feel some compression on the engine, which is okay. Avoid jerky movements. Now we're starting to get a little closer, so we're going to slow down a little bit. Keep rotating, keep rotating, keep rotating to right about there. Now with those lines properly aligned, we can now remove the high pressure fuel pump because the lobe on the camshaft is at the lowest position of the plunger. So it's the easiest point to remove and reinstall that high pressure fuel pump. Let's head over to the engine bay and remove that pump. Now with an M10 triple square socket, we can get in the engine bay, remove the 2 bolts for the high pressure fuel pump, and pull off the assembly. Now the reason why we showed you how to rotate the crankshaft is because this little plunger here rides on a lobe on the camshaft, and where that crankshaft is turned, it allows this lobe to have the lowest spot, and this plunger is the deepest in that hole. Now that will allow us to remove and install the high pressure fuel pump the easiest way possible. Now with that high pressure fuel pump removed, we can take a finger, push against the wall of the plunger, and remove this plunger out of the bucket. Be careful where you place this plunger because we do not want any dirt or debris on this, since it will be sitting in the engine oil. Now we can take a 90-degree pick, get right underneath here on that clip, push that out to the side, and then go underneath this rubber hose. Be very careful not to tear it. Get around it, pull that off. Now with all the remaining hoses disconnected from the vacuum pump, we'll take this electrical connector off by pulling the tab back, pressing down, moving to the side, and then we'll take a 10mm with an extension, remove this nut here, and then we will remove these other 2 T30 screws on this bracket that secures the pump. Now with all the screws removed, we're going to remove this bracket. It is quite tight on the stud, so a little extra force to pop it off is needed, and then we can set it to the side. Now that we have all the brackets and lines off of the vacuum pump, we can take our 10mm socket and remove the 3 bolts that hold it to the block. And we're going to pull gently out and remove the pump. Now that we have the pump off, you'll see there's a metal gasket here against the block. We need to remove this, which is often overlooked, so we can then install a new gasket and reseal the new pump. This is a metal gasket, and it can be stuck on there a little bit, so a little bit of force will be needed to remove it. This is going to be a multi-steel layered gasket, and there's a new one that we'll be replacing in the kit. Now that we have the vacuum pump all removed, we can take some brake clean and just spray around the area to make sure we get all the grease and grime off. Now there are going to be some spots that we're going to have to take some Scotch-Brite and just make sure we clean it off of the block. This is some old sealant from the old gasket. It's that blue stuff. We want to just make sure we can get this as clean as possible so our new gaskets that we're going to be installing has the best chance possible to seal. So now that we have all of this cleaned and prepped, we're going to want to take a little bit of engine oil. I have some here in my trusty measuring cup. Dab your finger and lubricate this camshaft lobe lightly. We just want to make sure when we start this up initially, this camshaft is not dry and has plenty of lubrication. We'll put a little bit more oil in there once we have it assembled, but right now we're just putting a light coat all over this camshaft lobe. So when looking inside of the vacuum pump, you'll see this key, and then in the camshaft, you're going to see notches where that key will fit. This is going to be facing towards the front of the car, like so. And by looking at our camshaft here, we're going to try to get that as close as possible so we can slide it on. Now with our key approximately in the location we want it, we're going to take our gasket here, rotate it like so, and you'll see there are some little ridges here, and that's so we can install this into the pump, slightly press down, you'll hear a little click, and now that gasket is on our pump here. Now with our vacuum pump pre-assembled with the gasket, we're going to want to have one of the bolts that is included in the kit, the long ones, in our hand when we install the vacuum pump. Now we're going to lower this pump down into the engine bay, slide it over this camshaft, slowly rotate it until it pops into that groove in the pump itself, just like so. We want to make sure that it's sitting flush, it's not rocking, and that's how it is right now. So we'll take this bolt and we'll thread it into one of the bolt holes to hold this pump loosely against the block. You may have to rotate the vacuum pump a little bit for the bolt holes to line up, but that one bolt that we put in there should hold this pretty centered. Using a 10mm socket, we're going to torque these bolts down to 8 Newton meters and then an additional 180 degrees. Now, if you don't have a fancy torque wrench with an angle gauge in it, you can use a Sharpie and mark 180 degrees on the bolt and then the surface you will be torquing to. You'll want to take the bracket that we removed earlier, make sure that the orientation is the tab facing upward, slide it underneath just like this, and then push it over this stud. It might be a little bit tricky, a little bit of force is needed. And then once we have that on, we're gonna take the 3 pieces of hardware that we removed and torque them to 10 Newton meters. Once that is all torqued down, we can take this electrical connector here and plug it back in and push that lock. Next, we're going to want to take a little bit of that engine oil that we poured earlier and lubricate inside of this hole where that bucket for the fuel pump is going to sit. A little bit of engine oil, and just make sure there's enough lubrication on all of that dry metal surface. Now, early in the video, we rotated the crankshaft, so the fuel pump bucket is in the lowest position in the vacuum pump housing. This is a great time to inspect this bucket for any wear on the roller or the bucket itself. So I'm just taking a look here, making sure that that roller spins freely, looking for any significant wear marks in this bucket, and this bucket looks beautiful. Now that we know this is a good bucket, we can just take a little bit of that engine oil and just coat it lightly on the outside like we did in the bore. Now, this bucket does have a key, and when I mean key, it's a little notch right here where my finger is. That is important how it is inserted into that bore. So we're gonna want the key facing straight up towards the hood, and then we can slowly slide this bucket in. It may take a little bit of rotation, but it will slide right in. Now, with the kit including a new O-ring for this high pressure fuel pump, we're gonna wanna take a 90-degree pick, get underneath the old seal, remove it just like so, and then take that new seal that we have and make sure it sits nicely in that groove just like that. Also, this is another good time to take a little bit of engine oil and just coat that seal slightly so it slides in that bore a lot easier. We're going to take our fuel pump and slide it right into the bore here, and since the bucket is in the lowest position, it should fit quite nicely. You'll feel a little bit resistance of that O-ring, and that's completely fine. Just make sure you don't roll that O-ring when sliding that fuel pump into the vacuum pump. Now, with the new bolts that are included in the kit and our M10 triple square socket, we can thread these bolts into the block by hand. Once those bolts are threaded in by hand, we're going to want to alternate from side to side in a couple sweeps of motion to lower that high pressure fuel pump down to the mating surface of the vacuum pump. And we're going to do this in just small stages because we don't want the pump going in sideways. Now we're going to torque these bolts to 25 Newton meters. Now, in our kit is included a new fitting that the high pressure fuel pump goes to, and by Volkswagen standard, this needs to be replaced anytime you remove that fuel line. So we have a 19-inch wrench here. I'm just breaking it free. It's a little bit tight clearance, so you might have to get creative in getting in there. Now, with our new fitting, we're going to thread this back into that hole and torque it to 60 Newton meters. All right, with that, we can now install our fuel line. With the new included fuel line in the kit, we'll have to remove these rubber ends and then coat the end of the fuel line with oil per the manual. So just a little bit of oil that we have set aside. Just coat the ends of this fuel line with that oil With that taken care of, we can now install the fuel line into the vehicle and thread on the connections. It's going to go in one direction, so please pay attention to the orientation how this is going in. Now that we're in place here, we can thread on the ends. Be careful not to strip these. Now we're going to take our specialty socket and torque these down to 40 Newton meters. Now, if you do not have this socket or access to it, these can be tightened down by hand with a open end wrench. However, for the sake of this video, we're going to show you the proper torquing procedure if you decide to go that route. Since we moved this coolant line earlier, we're going to snap this connection back onto the vacuum pump body and then take the T30 bolt that we removed, thread it back in, and then torque it to 9 Newton meters. With this coolant line now secure, we can clip in this retaining harness right here so it sits nice. And then we're going to have to remove this plastic clip from our old vacuum pump and reinstall it into the new one. Once that's reinstalled, we can take this hose and clip it back. Now in the kit, you will have a fitting like this that is included. We will have to reinstall that into the car. We're going to take a little bit of spray lubricant here to lubricate that O-ring and where that vacuum line will sit on it. And then orientate this part towards the passenger side of the vehicle. Clip that on just like so. Make sure you hear that audible click. And then take that vacuum line and route it onto that fitting. With the fuel pump securely installed, we can reroute this low pressure fuel line back into its clips and push this fuel connection back onto that high pressure fuel pump. Make sure you give it a good tug so it's not going to fall off, because we do not want fuel in the engine bay when the car is running. With that, we'll take this electrical connector for the high pressure fuel pump and clip it back into place and press the safety lock down. Now with the vacuum and fuel pump installed, we can start to route our charge pipe back into the engine bay. This can be a little bit tricky, so just be patient and try not to pinch any hoses or wires. Now with our charge pipe loosely sitting in the engine bay, we can remove our blue towels from our turbo discharge outlet, grab the silicone connector and connect everything loosely. With the coupler, it's good to put a little bit of lubricant in here. Glass cleaner works as well. Now there is a certain orientation that this needs to be installed. We'll need the hose with the lines marked on it facing upwards. It's best to put it on the turbo first and then connect the junction from the turbo to the charge pipe. Now we don't want to tighten these yet because we want the charge pipe in its final resting position before we tighten the hose clamps. So we're going to take this T30, screw it into the bracket, and we don't want to tighten this yet either because we will have another bolt that we're going to tighten down below and we might have to line it up. So it's good to have these bolts a little bit loose. Now underneath the car, we're going to want to thread in this mounting screw. And with that bolt now loosely installed, we can come back with our torque wrench and torque this to 7 Newton meters. Now that that is secure on the bottom, we can start reinstalling all of our wire retainers and reinstall our hose retainer here. Perfect. Slide this behind and slide this over. And then we want to clip this back in place. Make sure you hear that audible click. Give it a little tug. Make sure it's not going to come off. Now with this charge pipe securely fastened on the bottom, we can take this wiring harness and plop it back into this holder here and then plug this wiring harness cable tie holder into the charge pipe. Now we can remove our blue shop towel from the intercooler, spray some lubricant in our rubber charge pipe, and then reinstall like so. Make sure that is nice and snug and fully seated. Come back and tighten our hose clamps. All right, now with the charge pipe all assembled on the bottom side, let's go back up top and finish it off. We can now come back to this bolt that we left loose earlier and tighten it to 7 Newton meters as well. With that bolt tight, we can come and route this wiring harness to its proper places. There's going to be another zip tie clip that we're going to want to push into a hole down there and then wrap this around just like so. We're going to come back to the hose clamps on the turbo discharge pipe and tighten those down. Now that our charge pipe is back in place, we can start reassembling the intake. We're going to lay this pipe back down here and make sure that this little connector here goes back into the clip. There'll be another grommet here that we'll have to install once we have this pipe put in place. We can now remove the blue towel from our turbo, spray a little bit of glass cleaner on this intake pipe, spray a little bit of glass cleaner on our diverter valve fitting. Make sure we clip in this fitting. There we go. Give that a tug, make sure that doesn't come off, and then reinstall the intake onto the turbo inlet. With a flathead screwdriver or a 7mm socket, we can now tighten this clamp. Now with the upper intake hose installed, we can take a little bit of glass cleaner, spray it in there, spray a little bit of glass cleaner on our air intake box, slide it down, and then reinstall the clamp. We'll take this vacuum line here and slide it back onto this nipple of the air box. Now with this side of the engine bay assembled, we can head underneath, reinstall the washer fluid reservoir, and put back on the belly pan. Now with our washer fluid reservoir in hand, we can get a little bit of glass cleaner on these fittings just to make it a little bit easier since it's out of the car. Now with that, we're going to fish this back inside the wheel well. Now there is a little clip here that will hold it, so we don't need to put our hand underneath here, and we'll take the bolts for this and thread them all in by hand. This top bolt, you'll have to pull the reservoir towards you to overcome these clips, and then you can thread this in. Now with all the bolts hand tight, we can torque these down with our 10mm socket to 8 Newton meters. Now we can plug our electrical connectors back in. Listen for that audible click. All right, got that one. And then we can reinstall the washer fluid lines onto the pump. Make sure these are secure. Give them a little tug slightly to pull them off to make sure they're not coming off. Now with the lower half of the washer tank installed, let's get this fender liner back on. Now with the fender liner back in, we can put our wheel on and torque it when we're back on the ground. We're going to slide our belly pan into the grooves like so. And then install the 8 torque screws. Now with our vehicle safely back on the ground, we're going to take our 17mm wheel socket and our torque wrench and torque these down to 140 Newton meters. Now with some foaming glass cleaner, we're going to spray this end of the washer fluid fill tube and reinsert it down into the tank. Note when reinstalling this, there is a channel that it will have to slide into. Once it's in that channel and we've located the grommet, we can push down firmly and make sure that is seated correctly. Now with the filler tube in, we can take our 10mm bolt, thread it in by hand, and then torque this to 8 Newton meters. And And if you have an engine cover, you can place it on now. We don't have one for this car currently due to a recall, but there's going to be a later DIY video about that. Now you've successfully installed a new vacuum pump on your Mk8 Golf R GTI. This is a good point to check the fault codes in your car if there are any. If you opened a door or did something with ignition when you were working on the car, it may have stored some fault codes, so it's good practice just to check them and make sure that you have nothing in the engine control module. And with that, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, drop them in the comments section below. And if you want to see more content like this, you're in luck because we have a ton more DIY videos coming for the Mk8 Golf R and GTI platform and many more. So be sure to hit that subscribe button. My name's Cole from FCP Euro. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.